In the year 1901, a group of Greek sponge divers, forced by a storm to shelter near a small, rocky island called Antikythera, made a discovery that would take science over a century to fully understand. Diving deeper than usual to wait out the weather, they found the wreck of an ancient Roman-era cargo ship sitting on the seafloor, its hold still packed with treasure. Bronze statues, marble sculptures, glassware, coins. It was, by any measure, an extraordinary archaeological find, the kind that makes headlines and fills museum halls for generations. But buried among the treasure, almost overlooked entirely, was a small, unremarkable, badly corroded lump of bronze, barely the size of a shoebox, that nobody on that expedition understood, and that most assumed was simply worthless debris. It would take scientists more than 100 years, several generations of increasingly advanced imaging technology, and a level of forensic patience rarely applied to any single artifact in history, to finally understand what that corroded lump of bronze actually was. And when they did, it didn't just rewrite the history of one shipwreck. It forced historians to seriously reconsider what ancient civilizations were technologically capable of, roughly 2,000 years before anyone thought devices like it should have existed. At first glance, even to trained archaeologists in 1901, the object looked like nothing special, a shapeless, green corroded mass of bronze that had clearly once been some kind of mechanical device, but one so degraded by 2,000 years underwater that its original function seemed impossible to determine. It sat largely ignored in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens for decades, catalogued, studied briefly, and then set aside, while researchers focused their attention on the ship's more visually impressive treasures. The first real breakthrough came when a museum researcher, examining the fragments more closely years after the initial discovery, noticed something that shouldn't have been there. Gear teeth. Small, precisely cut, deliberately engineered gear teeth, embedded within the corroded bronze, the unmistakable signature of complex mechanical engineering. This was, immediately, a serious problem for conventional history, because devices with this level of gear-based mechanical complexity, geared clockwork specifically, weren't supposed to exist anywhere in the ancient world. The general historical consensus at the time held that this kind of precision mechanical engineering didn't reappear in human history until European clockmakers developed comparable technology more than 1,000 years later, sometime around the 14th century. And yet, here was a device, recovered from a shipwreck, dated with reasonable confidence to somewhere around 70 to 60 BCE, that appeared to contain exactly that kind of technology. For decades, researchers had only fragmentary access to the device's internal structure, limited by the imaging technology available at the time and the extreme fragility of the corroded bronze, which made any attempt at physical disassembly a genuine risk of destroying evidence permanently. Real understanding of the mechanism's true complexity only became possible in the early 2000s, when a research team gained access to high-resolution X-ray computed tomography scanning, technology originally developed for medical imaging, powerful enough to see through solid layers of corroded bronze without physically touching the fragile artifact at all. What that scan revealed left even experienced researchers in the field genuinely stunned. The device contained not just a few gears, but at least 30 separate, precisely cut bronze gears, some with teeth spaced with a level of mathematical precision that modern engineers found difficult to believe was achieved entirely by hand. Using tools available in the ancient Mediterranean world, these gears work together in an interlocking system specifically designed to calculate and display astronomical information, tracking the position of the sun and moon through the zodiac, predicting the timing of solar and lunar eclipses years in advance, and even accounting for the slightly irregular orbital speed of the moon, a genuinely sophisticated astronomical correction that requires real mathematical understanding of orbital mechanics to properly calculate. The mechanism didn't stop at eclipse prediction either. Further research revealed it also tracked the 4-year cycle of the ancient Panhellenic Games, including the Olympics, functioning simultaneously as an astronomical calculator and a kind of ancient cultural calendar, combined into a single portable bronze device roughly the size of a large book, originally housed inside a wooden case with inscribed instructions covering its surface. Essentially an ancient user manual, explaining exactly how to read and operate the machine. To understand just how genuinely anomalous this discovery is, it helps to know what happened, historically, after the Antikythera mechanism was built. Nothing comparable to it, in terms of geared mechanical complexity, appears anywhere in the historical or archaeological record for well over 1,000 years afterward. The sophisticated tradition of precision mechanical engineering that clearly must have existed to produce a device this refined simply vanishes from history, seemingly without a trace, without any surviving successor devices, without detailed technical writings describing how to build similar mechanisms, without any clear chain of technological inheritance connecting it to the clockwork devices that eventually reappeared in medieval Europe over a millennium later. This absence of any technological lineage is honestly one of the strangest parts of the entire mystery, and it's worth sitting with for a moment rather than rushing past it. Most significant ancient technologies leave behind some kind of traceable legacy, later devices that clearly build on earlier innovations, written texts describing the underlying principles, or at minimum, other surviving examples showing the technology's gradual development over time. The Antikythera mechanism, by contrast, appears almost fully formed, extraordinarily sophisticated, and then simply disappears from the archaeological and historical record entirely, as though an entire branch of ancient engineering knowledge existed briefly, and was then lost so completely that it took the rediscovery of a single waterlogged, corroded fragment, sitting in a museum drawer for the better part of a century, to prove it had ever existed at all. Ancient historical texts do offer a few tantalizing, if frustratingly vague, clues about where this level of mechanical sophistication may have come from. The Roman writer and statesman Cicero, writing decades after the Antikythera mechanism was likely constructed, specifically describes a mechanical device built by the Greek polymath Archimedes, capable of modeling the movements of the sun, moon, and planets. Cicero's account, while not a technical blueprint, strongly suggests that devices of this general type, sophisticated astronomical calculating machines, weren't necessarily a single isolated invention, but may have represented a broader, more established tradition of precision astronomical engineering within the ancient Greek world, one that modern historians simply have almost no other surviving physical evidence for, aside from this single, extraordinarily lucky shipwreck recovery. Some researchers have speculated that additional devices like the Antikythera mechanism may genuinely have existed in meaningful numbers throughout the ancient Mediterranean world, used by astronomers, philosophers, or wealthy patrons interested in tracking celestial events with genuine mathematical precision, and that the reason none of them survive today isn't because they were rare, but simply because bronze, the material used to construct them, was extraordinarily valuable throughout antiquity and the medieval period that followed. Bronze objects, unlike stone monuments or ceramic artifacts, were frequently melted down and repurposed for other uses: coins, weapons, tools, precisely because the raw material itself held significant practical and economic value, regardless of what object it had originally been shaped into. Under this theory, the Antikythera mechanism survives today for one very specific and somewhat ironic reason. It sank to the bottom of the sea, accidentally protected from exactly the kind of practical recycling that likely destroyed every other example of similar ancient technology that may have once existed. This explanation doesn't require any hidden or lost advanced civilization, doesn't require ancient aliens, and doesn't require anything beyond genuinely brilliant, well-documented ancient Greek mathematical and engineering tradition, applied with a level of precision and ambition that conventional history simply hadn't given the ancient world sufficient credit for prior to this discovery. But it does leave a genuinely unresolved and uncomfortable question sitting at the center of the entire case. If devices this sophisticated were common enough to have been built by multiple craftsmen working within an established engineering tradition, why does exactly one single example survive out of what may have been dozens or even hundreds constructed over centuries of ancient Greek and Roman astronomical practice? Modern researchers continue actively studying the mechanism today, using increasingly advanced imaging and modeling techniques to refine our understanding of its full functionality. and multiple independent teams have successfully built working physical and digital reconstructions based on the scan data, definitively proving the device functions exactly as the internal gear ratio suggests it should, accurately modeling astronomical cycles that took ancient Greek mathematicians genuine, documented centuries of observation and calculation to properly understand. What we're left with, more than 2,000 years after this small bronze device was built, and over a century after storm-driven sponge divers accidentally pulled it up from the seafloor, along with cargo nobody expected to matter nearly as much, is a genuine reminder of exactly how much of ancient human ingenuity has likely been lost entirely to time, corrosion, and the simple economic pressure to melt down anything valuable enough to be worth repurposing. The Antikythera Mechanism isn't evidence of some impossible, hidden, or supernatural ancient technology. It's evidence of something almost more remarkable, an entire sophisticated engineering tradition, genuinely achieved by ordinary human minds working within the ancient world that came astonishingly close to being completely and permanently forgotten, saved from erasure by nothing more than the accident of a single ship sinking in exactly the wrong place, at exactly the right depth, for a single storm to force a group of divers to look a little closer than anyone ever expected them to.